The last time I had seen my brother looking truly happy was at his wedding, 12 years ago in a small church outside of Kingston, Ontario. He wore a gray suit that was slightly too big for him and he kept tugging at the sleeves, and when his wife walked down the aisle he stopped fidgeting entirely, he just went still. That's the image I had carried of him for over a decade, that stillness, that look on his face like he had finally arrived somewhere he'd been trying to get to his whole life. So when I saw him standing in line outside the food bank on Division Street on a Tuesday morning in February, I thought I was mistaken. I genuinely did. I was driving past on my way to pick up a prescription, and I slowed down because the line was long and I didn't want to clip anyone stepping off the curb, and that's when I saw him. His shoulders were rounded forward the way they get when he's cold, which I recognized immediately because I had grown up watching those shoulders, and he was holding his daughter's hand. She's 9. She was wearing her purple winter coat with the broken zipper that I had noticed at Christmas and meant to replace, and she was looking up at him saying something I couldn't hear through the car window. I pulled over. I sat there for a moment because I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. My brother is a licensed electrician. He has been with the same company in Kingston for 11 years. He owns, or I believed he owned, a 3-bedroom house on a quiet street in the East End that he and his wife had bought 7 years ago with a down payment they'd been saving since before they got married. He is not a man who should be standing outside a food bank in February with his 9-year-old daughter. I got out of the car. He saw me before I reached him, and the expression on his face broke my heart before he even said a word. It wasn't embarrassment exactly. It was something worse than that. It was the look of a person who has been keeping something terrible a secret for so long that being discovered feels almost like relief, even when the relief itself is devastating. I said his name. I asked him what was going on. He glanced down at his daughter, and then back at me, and he said quietly that it was a long story. I told him I had time. I told him to let me take them somewhere warm, that we could talk, that whatever was happening we would figure it out. He hesitated for a long moment. Then he stepped out of the line. We went to the Tim Hortons 2 blocks away, and I bought his daughter a hot chocolate and a breakfast sandwich, and I watched her eat like she was hungry in a way that made my chest tight. My brother sat across from me with his hands wrapped around a coffee, and he stared at the table for a while before he started talking. He and his wife had been having problems for about 2 years, he said. He'd known things weren't right, but he hadn't wanted to admit it. She had become distant, secretive about her phone, coming home late with explanations that didn't quite line up. He told himself it was stress. She had been going through something, he said. He didn't want to push. Then, about 8 months ago, he started getting calls from a collections agency. He didn't understand it at first because, as far as he knew, they had no outstanding debt beyond their mortgage. He and his wife had always kept a joint account for household expenses, but they each had their own accounts too, and he had never had reason to look closely at anything because she handled most of the household finances. She was good with money, he always said. She was organized. He trusted her completely. The collections calls were about a line of credit he had never opened, $34,000, drawn down almost entirely. When he confronted her about it, she had an explanation ready. She said she had opened it in both their names months ago and had mentioned it to him, that they had talked about it, that he must have forgotten. She pulled out paperwork. His name was on it. His signature was on it. He stared at that signature for a long time and he thought, did I sign this? Because sometimes when you're tired and someone puts something in front of you and says it's routine, you sign things without reading them carefully. He thought maybe he had. He wasn't sure. She was so calm about it, so certain, that his own memory started to feel unreliable. She said the money had been for the car repair, for the new furnace, for various expenses she'd been managing quietly so he wouldn't have to worry. She said he'd been so busy with work and she'd just handled it. She made him feel that questioning her was ungrateful. He apologized. He actually apologized. A month later, more calls. A second line of credit, $22,000. Same story. He told me he went through a period where he genuinely wondered if something was wrong with him, if he was having some kind of memory episodes, because he couldn't reconcile the man he believed himself to be careful, attentive, present with the person she was describing, a person who signed things and forgot, a person who agreed to financial decisions and had no recollection of them afterward. He stopped sleeping properly. He lost weight. He started second-guessing himself at work in ways that had never happened before. His foreman asked him twice if he was all right. I reached across the table and I put my hand over his, and I said, "Your signature can be forged." He looked at me. I said it again. I told him that what he was describing, the certainty, the paperwork that appeared already signed, the explanations that made him feel confused rather than suspicious, that is a pattern. I told him I had seen it before, not personally but professionally, because for 31 years before I retired I worked as a forensic accountant, first for a firm in Toronto and later as a consultant. And financial fraud inside marriages is more common than most people ever want to believe. He was quiet for a long time. His daughter had finished her sandwich and was drawing on a napkin with a pen she'd found in my coat pocket. He watched her for a moment. Then he told me the rest. 6 weeks ago, he had come home from a 12-day contract job in Belleville. He had been away longer than expected because of delays on the project, but he had texted her every day, had spoken to his daughter on the phone every evening. When he got back, the house was empty. Not empty as in his wife and daughter were out. Empty as in the furniture was gone. His daughter's bedroom was cleared out. The kitchen cupboards were bare. His wife's clothes were not in the closet. There was a letter on the counter from a property management company advising the current occupants that the property had been sold and that vacant possession was required within 30 days. His name was not on the letter. The letter was addressed to his wife only, but the property address was his home. He called her. She didn't answer. He called her mother. Her mother said she didn't know where she was. He called a lawyer the next morning, who told him that the house had been sold 6 weeks earlier before he left for Belleville to a numbered company registered in Ontario. The sale price was listed at significantly below market value. His wife had signed as sole vendor, presenting documentation suggesting she was the sole owner. His name had been removed from the title by means of a transfer document bearing what appeared to be his signature 14 months earlier. He had never signed that document. He had been living in the house he no longer legally owned for over a year without knowing it. I asked him where he had been sleeping. He told me that for the first 2 weeks after he came back, he had stayed in his work van, parked in the lot behind his company's warehouse. He said his daughter had been staying with his wife's sister during that time, that his wife had told the sister some version of events that had apparently satisfied her, and that he had been trying to get access to his daughter through back channels because he was afraid if he pushed too hard he would lose her entirely. His wife had told him, before she disappeared, that if he made trouble she would go to family court and tell them things about him that would ensure he never saw his daughter unsupervised. She didn't specify what those things were. She didn't need to. He had been managing, he said. He had friends from work who had let him stay with them for a few weeks. He'd found a furnished basement room to rent in month to month. He'd gotten a family lawyer who had managed to get him interim access to his daughter every Tuesday and alternate weekends. He was functioning. But his RRSP had been cleaned out. She had been the co-signatory on the account for years, and the collections agencies were still calling about the lines of credit, and his credit score had collapsed, and he was behind on his daughter's school fees, and some weeks the money simply did not stretch. He hadn't told me any of this, he said, because he was ashamed, not of her, of himself, for not seeing it, for signing things without reading them, for being the kind of man, he thought, that something like this could happen to. I want to be honest about something. Sitting across from my brother in that Tim Hortons, I felt something that took me a moment to name. It wasn't just anger, though I was angry. It was a specific, focused kind of clarity that I've only ever felt a few times in my career, usually at the moment when a case that looked complicated suddenly becomes simple. When the numbers stop being noise and start telling you exactly what happened and exactly who did it. I told him to give me 2 weeks. He said he didn't want me involved. He said it was his problem and he would handle it. I told him that was the most expensive thing he could say to me right now, and that I had been handling problems like his for 3 decades, and that he was going to let me help him, or I was going to be very difficult to be around at family dinners for the foreseeable future. He almost smiled. It was small, but it was there. I started that same afternoon. The first thing I did was request copies of every financial document he could access: bank statements, the credit applications, the title transfer documentation, the mortgage discharge papers. He had some of it already from his lawyer. The rest I helped him obtain through formal requests to the relevant institutions. I had done this hundreds of times, and I knew exactly which forms to file and which offices to contact and how to phrase requests to get results quickly rather than being routed in circles. The signature on the title transfer was the first thing that confirmed what I already suspected. I am not a handwriting expert, but I have worked with enough of them to know what a traced or copied signature looks like when you put it next to the genuine article, and the transfer document signature looked nothing like the 3 samples of my brother's actual signature that I had pulled from other verified documents. The pen pressure was wrong. The letter formation was inconsistent in ways that suggested someone working carefully from a model rather than writing naturally. A genuine signature has a kind of unconscious momentum to it. This one didn't. The credit applications were similar. The address listed on one of them was a property in Napanee, not his home address, which suggested someone had submitted the application in person at a branch where the staff didn't know him, using ID that listed a different address. The timing of the drawdowns corresponded almost perfectly with periods when my brother had been away on contracts, which was not a coincidence. The numbered company that had purchased the house was the more interesting thread. I have a former colleague who now works in corporate registry research, and I called in a favor. The numbered company had been registered 8 months before the house sale by 2 directors, my brother's wife and her cousin, who it turned out ran a small property flipping business out of Barrie. The sale price of the house, $240,000 below the neighborhood average, suggested the intent was to flip it quickly for profit. The house had already been relisted at full market value under a different brokerage. I prepared a document package. It took me 9 days. When it was complete, it included a forensic summary of the signature discrepancies, a timeline of the fraudulent credit applications, cross-referenced with my brother's documented work travel, the corporate registry information for the numbered company, the title transfer documentation with annotations, and a formal declaration of my qualifications and methodology, because I knew it would need to hold up to scrutiny. I gave 1 copy to my brother's lawyer. I filed another with the Ontario Provincial Police Financial Crimes Unit, where I still had contacts from a case I had consulted on 4 years earlier. I sent a third to the Canada Revenue Agency Fraud Division, because the numbered company transaction had implications beyond the property fraud that I suspected the CRA would find interesting. The lawyer moved for an emergency injunction to halt the resale of the property pending investigation. It was granted within 72 hours. My brother's wife was located in Barrie, staying at her cousin's property. She had, it emerged, been planning to leave the province once the house resale completed and the proceeds were divided. That plan did not materialize. She and her cousin were both arrested and charged in the same week. The charges included fraud over $5,000, forgery, identity theft, and breach of trust. The Crown added a charge related to the fraudulent credit applications that carried a separate sentencing track. His daughter was returned to his primary care on an interim basis while the family court matter was resolved. The title transfer was voided. The property was restored to joint matrimonial ownership pending the divorce proceedings, which my brother's lawyer filed immediately and which moved quickly given the criminal charges. The lines of credit were disputed on the basis of fraudulent application, and 3 of the 4 were removed from his credit profile entirely within 6 months. The RRSP funds were more complicated, those took longer to address through the civil proceedings, but ultimately a substantial portion was recovered as part of the divorce settlement. His wife received 22 months in a federal correctional institution. Her cousin received 31 months. My brother stood in the courthouse hallway afterward and I watched him absorb that information. I don't think he felt the satisfaction people imagine you feel in those moments. I think he mostly felt tired. He told me later that what he felt was grief for the marriage he thought he had, for the years he'd spent trusting someone completely, for the person he'd believed her to be. Justice doesn't undo any of that. It just closes the door on it properly. His daughter had nightmares for several months after everything settled. My brother found her a child therapist she connected with, a woman in Kingston who specializes in families going through separation, and the nightmares became less frequent over time. My brother went himself too, which I was glad about. He needed to talk to someone other than his lawyer or his sister about the part of all this that had nothing to do with paperwork, the part where someone you loved looked at you as a resource to be managed rather than a person to be respected, and you hadn't known. He is doing better now. He is still in Kingston, still working for the same company, which gave him extended leave during the worst of it and took him back without any fanfare, the way good employers do. He bought a small house last spring, just him and his daughter, a 2-bedroom with a backyard and a garage, where he keeps his tools and where his daughter has set up a corner with a folding table for her art projects. I visited in July and we sat on the back porch in the evening, and it was warm and his daughter was chasing fireflies in the grass, and he told me he'd started sleeping properly again. He said he was sorry he hadn't called me sooner. He said he kept thinking he would get it under control, that it was his mess and his responsibility to clean it up, that bringing family into it would mean admitting out loud how badly things had gone. He said he was ashamed of how long he had believed her version of events over his own instincts. I told him that's exactly what she wanted. That making someone doubt their own perception is a strategy, not an accident, and that it works on intelligent, self-aware people at least as effectively as it works on anyone else, maybe more so, because intelligent people are better at constructing explanations for things that don't add up. He nodded. He watched his daughter for a while. Then he said, "I keep thinking about the food bank line, about her seeing me in that line." He meant his daughter. I asked him what he thought about it. He said he used to feel like it was the lowest point, the moment he'd failed the furthest. But now he thought maybe it was the moment things started moving in a different direction, because I had driven past and seen him and stopped. I told him I was glad I needed that prescription. What I want anyone to hear in this story, because I've told pieces of it to people since, when it seemed relevant, is that financial abuse inside a marriage doesn't always look like what you imagine. It doesn't always involve someone taking the grocery money or controlling a debit card. Sometimes it looks like someone who handles the finances carefully and competently for years, who builds trust precisely so that trust can be used. Sometimes it looks like a signature on a document you don't remember signing, and an explanation just reasonable enough that you start to doubt your own memory rather than the person standing in front of you. And sometimes it happens to someone steady and hardworking and decent, someone who would never in 100 years think it could happen to him, because he assumed that the person he had married was the person she appeared to be. It can happen to anyone. The shame belongs entirely to the person who chose to do it. My brother is the one who survived it, and he is not the one who should be ashamed. He still tucks his daughter in every night she's with him. He texts me on Sunday mornings, usually just a photo of whatever they've made for breakfast. Last week it was pancakes shaped badly into what his daughter informed me were supposed to be polar bears. I told her they were very convincing. She sent back a voice memo of herself laughing. "That's what I think about when I think about how this ended.